Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're finishing with Ian Juby's Niagara Falls video. When we last left it, he was talking about how a drawing from a guy who estimated the falls to be 3 times taller than they actually are was more accurate than an estimate by a guy who was there helping to set up the first actual survey of the fall's rim. Next, he does some rough guesstimating as to where the falls must have been for Hennepin's drawing to be accurate, compares that to where they are today, and then calculates an erosion rate of 12.5 feet per year to 16.5 feet per year. An absolutely ridiculous number. But he takes a long time to do it, and he never actually explains what he thinks the significance of such an erosion rate would be. The implication seems to be that if you use that rate as a constant, then the falls formed really quickly. But I'm gonna skip it.
Now, one might say my assumptions are on shaky ground. My assumption that Hennepin's drawing is accurate and that we can estimate erosion rates based on that drawing. But you see, that's the thing. Charles Lyell had absolutely zero excuse to A, not conduct actual scientific measurements of erosion rates, or B, to not include the measurements that had already been conducted.
There's a few things here. First and foremost, one geologist in the past made questionable assumptions and thereby arrived at the wrong answer, therefore I'm perfectly justified in making even wilder assumptions based on even worse data, is an absolutely terrible way to present your argument. This is essentially the "I know you are, but what am I" of arguments. Secondly, Lyell was there helping to set up a survey with the purpose of scientifically and accurately measuring the erosion rates, which leads to the third. The scientific measurement had not been conducted yet. All he had to go on was Bakewell's guess that it was about 3 feet per year. That's it. There were no measurements. Anytime I've looked up the erosion rate of the falls, I always find people giving numbers of the average erosion rate since 1842, because that's when the survey that Lyell helped set up was completed. You are literally standing here criticizing the guy that helped set up the survey that would allow us to directly and accurately measure the erosion rate of the falls for the first time, for not having used the measurements that didn't even exist when he was there.
That's right. There was plenty of data around decades before Lyell ever came along. This map was the first ever actual map produced by a survey.
But did that survey include a survey of the rim of the falls? I'm willing to bet no, seeing as how everyone else references Hall's 1842 survey as being the first.
His survey did not include scale, and his surveys and maps were based on longitude and latitude.
So what? We're supposed to figure out the erosion rate from a survey that didn't even use an accurate scale with which to estimate distances? And this is supposed to help your case?
However, this map is still very enlightening. Notice the island, which parts the falls, parts the two falls. It's long and narrow, pointing only slightly away from due north, and almost parallel with the gorge. This is in stark contrast to the modern-day Goat Island, which is a wide island whose longitudinal axis runs almost due east-west.
Okay, he harps on this a lot. I'm not sure why. He brought it up in Hennepin's drawing as well. He does eventually claim that this is what Luna Island, a small island just north of Goat Island, looked like in Hennepin's day, but I can only find references to Hennepin talking about fir trees on Goat Island, but I can't confirm that this is referring to the large island in his drawing. So I don't know if the island there was supposed to be Luna Island or Goat Island. But one thing is sure, it doesn't matter. We are aware of the rock slides that altered the appearance of the falls in the early 1800s, but when calculating the average erosion rates over time, using a short period of time that is known to include a significant and unusual erosional event is a dishonest tactic at best.
Ellicott's map lines up with Hennepin's drawing, quite remarkably. Also bear in mind, at this time, the volume of water flowing over the falls was at least 2 to perhaps 5 times the modern day volume, and possibly more.
Is it even possible to be less specific than that? It was 2 to as much as 5 times the volume, maybe even more. So basically, any amount of water that is more than twice today's amount is within your range? And yes, depending on where you're measuring, we've decreased the water flow over the falls anywhere from 40 to 90%, which is very significant, and it's both to generate electricity and it's specifically to prevent erosion. This isn't some big gotcha that people are trying to keep a secret. It is known.
It is known.
It is known.
As a result, there was radical changes in the shorelines, as can be seen when you comparing Ellicott's map to the modern day riverbed.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is suggesting that there haven't been changes to the river. Again, Lyell mentioned this himself right before his estimation of how fast it erodes on average, pointing out that Goat Island has lost several acres over just 4 years. You know, that island that you bring up saying it can't be Goat Island because it looks different from modern-day Goat Island? Well, apparently it lost several acres in just 4 years, and it was Lyell pointing this out. If it could lose so much in so short a time, why couldn't it also be eroded from what is shown on Ellicott's map to what it is today in over 2 centuries? I'm skipping the rest of this one. This whole argument just amounts to, why didn't Lyell calculate a steady erosion rate based on where the falls were before the known rockslide events of 1814 and 1828? Like, a rockslide is an event that can drastically change the shape and location of a waterfall. We know this. Lyell knew this. It's not rocket science, so to choose this as a hill to die on just seems weird.
Erosion rates by water volume are exponential. We know the river volume was at least 2 times higher in the past than today's rates because we diverted 50% to 80% of the water of volume around the falls.
Yes, which is one of the reasons why, when you look up what the erosion rate of the falls actually is, you find websites that divide that number up by time periods. 1.16 meters per year from 1842 to 1905, 0.7 meters per year from 1906 to 1927, and less than 30 centimeters per year for the Horseshoe Falls, and about 30 centimeters every 10 years for the American Falls today. Notice that the data starts at 1842. Where have I heard that year before? Oh yeah, that's the year that Hall published his survey that was the first to even attempt to measure the erosion rate. The survey that Lyell assisted with. Funny how that keeps coming up. Also, I find it interesting that one of us keeps bringing up actual data from surveys that were meant to measure this exact thing, while the other keeps going to pictures that are known to be exaggerated, using them to loosely figure out where the falls might have been back then on a modern map, ignoring the 2 major rock slides of the early 1800s, and then calculating ridiculous erosion rates based on that. Not to mention ignoring the several times when Lyell explicitly mentioned his awareness of all these data points, while pretending the whole time that he was ignoring it in order to push a narrative.
If you double the flow volume of a river, erosion rates increase by 4 times or more. This does not take into account the possibility of extremely high flow rates in the ancient past because of the meltback of Ice Age glaciers, which could have produced a dramatic increase in water volume.
Just you try and find me a secular source for the formation of the falls that doesn't mention the Ice Age. I dare you. It's not possible, because the last glacial maximum played some important parts in the history of Niagara Falls, not the least of which was an increase in water volume. Also, bear in mind that comparing the older natural erosion rate to today's let's try everything we can to stop it from eroding erosion rate is going to be misleading. Like, the modern erosion rate of the American Falls is 3 centimeters per year. That's 38 times less than the average erosion rate between 1842 and 1905. And you're telling me that having a faster erosion rate than today is supposed to be a problem when this data is right out there for anyone to find?
If you visit the Falls and Gorge today, and I highly recommend you do so, you can actually see the different rock types in the layering exposed in the gorge.
Different rock types that couldn't possibly have formed in one singular catastrophic flooding event. Remember the shale? Oh wait, you do remember the shale.
The softer shales thicken considerably while the limestone thins.
Right. So if what you're saying is correct, then down the gorge from the falls, the shale is thicker. But shale needs calm water in order to form. It is made up of small-grained sediments, so it is necessary for the water to remain calm, thereby allowing the larger-grained sandy sediments time to settle and be deposited before the smaller-grained sediments that eventually make up the shale have time to settle. Shale could not possibly have been formed by the global flood. The floodwaters would have been far too catastrophic. So what this comes down to is that even if every single thing that Juby has said in this video is correct, the flood still didn't happen. It would just mean that Niagara Falls is younger than we thought it was. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I mention that creation relies entirely on attempting to poke holes in other theories rather than actually presenting their own evidence. In order for creationism to even make an attempt at appearing scientific, they first have to completely discredit several other well-supported and well-understood fields of science. And since there is no evidence in favor of creationism, aside from what it says in the Bible, they have to spend all of their time trying to poke holes in what they see as evolutionist science. I am entirely unaware of any creationist argument that doesn't end up either saying this well-established science is wrong, without providing any reason to believe their hypothesis as an alternative, or just flat out God of the gaps, we haven't figured out X yet, therefore it must be creation. So ask yourself this. Compare myself to Ian Juby. Which of us had to ignore huge chunks of the other side's data in order to present their case? Which conclusions are more likely to be accurate? Those that need to ignore a bunch of stuff in order to get there, or those that can safely and fully examine all sides?
So the falls would have eroded the gorge at far faster rates than the modern rates measured in the 40s, because the water would have had way thinner limestone to work and far more of the softer shales to erode.
Yeah, if only someone back in 1842 could have been there to say that at some points it must have receded much faster than at present, and at others much slower, and it would be scarcely possible to decide whether its average progress had been more or less rapid than now. Oh, wait a minute. That's an exact direct quote from what Lyell said. Now I'm skipping his bit about St. David's Gorge. He just takes a long time explaining that there used to be a gorge there that was filled in by a glacier. If you want to read about it, I'll leave a link down below, but he just asserts that the river carved the gorge to the whirlpool in a matter of weeks and then moves on as if he's demonstrated something.
Lyell was without excuse for what he published in his book that misled countless numbers into discounting this book as a literal history book and embracing his fictitious story of deep time.
If, hey, here's a rough estimate for the age of a feature for which we currently have no accurate estimates, and it's about 35,000 years, but we can't actually know this with any certainty due to the variability of the geology of the gorge, is enough to dismantle the Bible's whole story, then maybe instead of trying to poke holes in 2 centuries old geology books, you should instead focus more on strengthening your own position.
Now, you can call Lyell's work and writings anything you want, as long as you don't use words like good work, accurate, scientific, or honest,
says the guy who is forced to ignore a good chunk of Lyell's work in order to make it appear to be wrong. Again, to reiterate, Lyell pointed out explicitly that his numbers were not meant to be taken as authoritative. How is that not honest?
Lyell deliberately, and I would say deceitfully, convinced countless numbers that this book was fiction, when in fact it was Lyell's book that was fiction, and consequently the deep time beliefs.
No, that's not how that works. Lyell didn't set out to disprove the biblical timeline. It just so happens that he did. Though certainly not by using Niagara Falls. Lyell's book also was not fiction. Certainly he didn't get everything right, but finding one of those inaccuracies and then misrepresenting how that inaccuracy was initially presented does not render the whole book fiction. And finally, we have plenty of reasons to accept the fact that the Earth and universe are both billions of years old, which have nothing to do with anything that Lyell wrote. So even if Lyell was wrong about everything, that would not render the conclusions of deep time false.
The Niagara Gorge, if used as a uniformitarian clock, actually affirms the biblical timeline, as the gorge is demonstrably very young.
I noticed that through this whole video, Juby has not once actually provided an age for the falls using any of his calculation methods. He leaves that up to implication. I wonder if that's because he knows that all of the evidence suggests that Niagara Falls is over 12,000 years old, which suggests to me that the omissions in this video are not deliberate lies, but rather the typical creationist laziness when it comes to checking sources. He read on a creationist website about the story that Lyell met a local and guesstimated the erosion rate from that conversation, and didn't look any deeper than that. Had he actually read Lyell's book and then gone to give this presentation, that would be deliberate deception. But if he's okay with deliberate deception, he would be able to come out and say that the falls are only 4,000 years old. But he can't seem to bring himself to do that, which leads me to believe that he is lazy and ignorant rather than deceptive. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Cousin Ed, who says, I just want to say I'm really happy for these slightly shorter, more frequent Rhino doses. Particularly for biology, geology topics, harder for my pea brain to digest, these 15-minute-ish chunks are less daunting. Plus, Rhino 2 or more days in a row? Yes, please. So thanks is what I'm trying to say. Wish I was close enough to bring you some beer. I chose this comment for a couple of reasons. First, should anyone want to buy me a beer, PayPal link is down below, but as always, that's not necessary. Your undying, unconditional, eternal gratitude will suffice. Second, update on my 2 short videos experiment. YouTube makes it hard for me to gather data on how many ads are shown per view, so I've had to rely entirely on your comments about them to gauge whether or not it's working. And so far, it seems to be. People have been commenting that they are getting about 2 to 3 ads on the shorter videos rather than the 7 to 10 that I was sometimes seeing on the longer videos. Yes, YouTube ostensibly lets me control where I put ads and how many mid-rolls there are, but I never place more than 3 ads in a video, no matter how long the video is, so 7 to 10 mid-rolls is absolutely unacceptable. So I shall continue with the short 2 parts. I do make sure to have a link to the corresponding part in each description, so that it makes it easy to watch them in order, but I find with creationist claims the order isn't really all that important. Third, I have had occasional requests to release my videos in podcast format, so I'm going to give that a go, and this comment reminded me to mention that. As of right now, my plan is to release the podcast as part 1 and part 2 of whatever video I'm working on as one episode smushed together, with the cheesy Batman cliffhanger thing taken out, and occasionally re-release one of my older videos as a podcast episode. I plan on doing this on Spreaker, which apparently allows me to monetize right from day 1, but they say that if you need to mark the podcast as explicit, it basically does what YouTube's limited or no ads thing does, so the podcast will likely be censored. That being said, I also plan on releasing an ad-free, uncensored version of the podcast for patrons, so if you really need to hear me say fuck, then that's an option. Final update? According to Social Blade, I am on track to hit 60,000 subscribers by the end of October, so I've started planning my face reveal livestream, and I'm thinking a nice little celebratory livestream on Halloween would be fun. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Jerry the Berry, David Shinkle, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the rocks that fall off the waterfall that is my channel. If you'd like creationists to ignore you while simultaneously using you to prove creation, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description, as well as my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!